Welcome to issue 55 of the Steve and Cimino Says Boom podcast.
Boom!
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show issue 55. Woo, baby, we got a good one today. And before we get into it, now, what do we got to do? Because we don't have a clue.
Oh, you got a clue. You got a clue. Everyone knows the house rules. Look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content like this episode tonight. And gentlemen, I don't know if you're aware, but it's time for your initiation because you guys are going to be entering the Sworn. That's all I'm saying.
Wow.
Okay, what we're doing today, we have a special guest, but what we're going to do with the Monster Man is that we're going to talk a little bit, get some more background about us. Steve, what are we talking about today? Do you even have a clue? Does the big bad Thanos baby have a clue?
I do have a clue. Today's theme is the three things that are most important to each of us in regards to comics. How did we get there? What was the What was the spark? What was it? So, I purloined my memory to the core thinking, okay, what was it? What was the initial things? So I know I have, I have one TV thing and two comic things, but when I go right back to the beginning of my life as a comic reader, boom, we're going to see it today.
Good. You know why I love this, Steve? Because I love delving into our past. Because we always find a lot of similarities in what we were doing over the pond with each other. And it's kind of funny to see that we weren't just listening to ABBA. We weren't just listening to ABBA with each other. We were and we're going to learn a little. I love to learn about Niall because Niall's a couple years younger than us. So he has a different perspective. But we got to get somebody else that, like I said, that's going to get our juices going. And somebody else that is going to throw in his top three things that got them into comics. And why not better than the Monster Man himself, the King of Swass, and the Lady Death creator himself. Who is he, Niall?
Mr. Brian Pulido.
Oh.
What's up, you savages?
Yes.
When I got this call from John, I trembled, but I answered the call. When I heard it was you two lunatics, I couldn't say no. This is a great show and tell. Let's do it.
Yes. I'm excited.
What we're going to do is we're going to tell everybody the top three things that got us into comics, and we'll give a little discussion of it. So we're going to start with Steve. We'll go to Niall. Then you, Brian, and then with me, and then we'll wrap it all up. All right, Steve, the top three things. Number three on Steve's list. Go ahead, Steve. You take it away.
All right. Every person of my age, okay, will know exactly what I'm going to say. It was the Incredible Hulk TV series. We got it a little bit later than you. We got it a year after you guys, you lucky Yanks, you sitting there laughing and joking at the rest of the world. But I was able to, and this is significant, I watched these episodes before I'd even read comics, okay? Because I had been in Africa, I'd come back to England, comics wasn't part of my life. And here I am. I'm sitting there. It's probably mid 1978. And this thing pops up on TV. And I was immediately mesmerized. One, I was a tiny, small, little, scrawny kid. So when I saw Lou, I was like, oh my God, I want to be as big as that. And my mom was like, you stupid boy. I was like, no, like that. It was truly an eye-opening experience. And again, for all of us who were small, and I know it's hard to believe that I was, we dreamed, some people run out and fly, some people put a cape on. I wanted to lift the biggest rocks. So I was outside lifting these rocks, like, yeah, look at me lifting and rowing, and I know John Cimino right there is probably like, I did that too, but I threw bigger rocks than you.
Yeah.
So, whenever I'd watch it, and every week when it would come on, and I would just get to that point where someone was pushing him, someone was jabbing him, and that little music would start, and then his eyes would change, and I was just like, oh, he's going to take care of business now, So yeah, that's definitely pivotal in, my exposure to superheroes or supervillains, super characters, whatever it was. And I did happen to mention to one of my friends at school, and this was the first time that I knew something was weird. I was like, yeah, I watched the Hulk. Oh, I love it. And he went, that's not the real Hulk. with the snooty nose. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, one day when you come over my house, I'll show you what he really can do.
Ooh.
I was like, what? He goes, yeah, he gets shot and he's bleeding. He goes, no. I'll show you the real Hulk. So, again, I hadn't read any comics, American superhero comics. That was my first exposure to the superhero medium.
All right, now, number 3. What do you got?
Number 3 for me. So, interesting story. So, my dad's a contractor, and he was doing work for a gentleman who actually worked for Kenner. And so, the toys,
Ooh.
so my big thing was the first introduction to superheroes, which led me into comics, was the Kenner Superpowers action figures.
Superpowers, yeah.
Yeah, so it was 1988. He comes home. He comes home because these came out in 1984. He comes home 1988. I wake up, right? So he must have put him in there as a surprise. I had a Batman figure with a motorcycle, and I had a Superman figure, but they weren't in packages or anything. And my dad was explaining, "Yo, this is from a customer of mine." I told him my kids or whatever, and gave them to me. And I was like, "Whoa, who is he?" Like, "Oh, he's like, this is Superman. This is Batman." I was like, "Whoa, this is cool." And come to find out, what's really interesting about this is the copies I have weren't weren't distributed figures.
Oh, cool.
They were like the prototypes that were sent to the creative team, and so that was the final rendered one. And he had a couple of them, so he said, "Yeah, give it to your son and what have you." And after that, I was like, "Oh, I had to know more." And of course, I had to get the action figures. I found out my neighbors who were a little older than me had them and all that stuff. And then I was just diving. I mean, I was Superman. Batman didn't take for me for a few more years, which we'll get into. But that definitely brought me to Superman. And whatever I did, I was Superman. And if it wasn't for those figures, I don't know when my love for comics.
Those were great figures.
They're
Those were
great
good.
figures.
Yeah, I love those superpowers.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, what do you got? You're number 3.
When I was a wee lad, long before I could even read, our family would go to the flea market in Englishtown, New Jersey, or in Collingswood. We'd go to the auction. And this place would have everything from book stalls to socks, etc. And even prior to reading, I was attracted to these little booklets that had the covers ripped off at the top. And it was words and pictures. And I was just fascinated by them. And as time went on, my fascination grew. And I started to learn to read. And in fact, I actually got left back in the first grade because I was behind on my reading. Yet these things helped me to read. And I would read any of them. And they had names: Richie Rich, Archie, Where Monsters Dwell, Werewolf by Night. What were they really? Well, this love was kind of a background. I went from being unable to read and kind of in special education for reading to being a voracious reader. But what really crystallized my adoration for comics and collecting happened in 1974 in July. This is an actual badge from the New York Comic Art Convention that I attended. And this particular weekend crystallized my love to collect comics. And let me give you a couple of brief moments that I still recall from this con. So this convention, classic convention on the East Coast, was held in a hotel. What was it? It was in Penn. It was in the Hotel Commodore, which later became the Penta, which became this, which became that. I paid my fee to get in. I went up through the elevator doors open. I walked down the hall, and who do I see? I could not believe it. I saw Mick Jagger selling comic books. That's right. I saw Mike Carbonaro selling comic books. I met Mike Carbo back then. Another moment from that time, I became actually an assistant to an East Coast comic dealer who deals comics to this day, a guy named Jim Walsh. I would kind of keep an eye on his booth as a young kid. And this particular weekend, I was very, very close to this star artist who I observed giving a critique. This star artist was frightening. Who was this man? How could he talk to this aspiring artist in this manner? Who was this man? I turned to Jim. Jim, who is this guy? Oh, be careful. That's Neil Adams. Of course, later in life, Neil, it's a separate story for a different time. You know, the respect and adoration and love I have for that man and the times that we've had together, I'll cherish for my whole life. But at the time, it was scary. One final moment I'll share from that particular glorious weekend was the following. So there were comic book creators of the day and of the time here and there, yet there was another comic creator who had an entire room to himself. Maybe it was 20 by 12 and all his wares were laid out and the art was amazing, evocative, like nothing I'd ever seen before. And who was this man who was dressed quite dapper and perhaps was even a rockabilly? Well, it was the one and only Jim Steranko.
Yeah, that's what I got.
Even then, when I was in Jim Steranko's orbit, I felt special. I felt like the only human being in that room. And he left that particular impression on me. And on that weekend, he actually did sign a bunch of caps for me, which I have to this day. And as it was the time, the comics were signed on the inside underneath the indicia. So I do have a list to Brian, Jim Steranko. So that little button and the accompanying little program.
We got the booklet. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic.
It's beautiful. So that is, I must have connected with comics. I mean, I was 4 or 5, so it's even back then. So I was 13 when I went to my first con, and that just cemented it for me, and I've never looked back since.
Wow. That's pretty impressive, because actually getting there at that young of an age to do that was so beyond worlds for me, you know?
Yeah, I was just like, if you remember, I was living in New Jersey, so I just took the North Jersey Coast train line. I got out at Madison Square Garden and literally just walked across the street. And to my recollection, I think I went solo when I just met, Jim Walsh, who I knew up there.
And I'm sure Mike Carbonaro had white hair then. So
Well, that bigger than life personality. I was like, my God, Mick Jagger sells comics.
I was just with him a few months ago, hanging out with him. Okay. My number 3 is obviously, it's going to tie to Thanos over here, but there was a little bit more. There was a little bit more there. Now, obviously the TV was a huge thing for us. You know, you had your 4 channels and all that stuff you had, but there was a few things on, but these were the 6 things that really, really captured my imagination. The Shazam, I'll never forget that Winnebago with the unbelievable thunderbolt and him throwing the styrofoam rocks. Incredible. Then the Spidey Super Stories, that electric company. I did not really quite know Spider-Man. Spider-Man was one of my first words too. My mom said that to me, that Spidey, I used to say a lot, like at 3 years old. But although Spidey Super Stories, incredible. Then we had the Hanna-Barbera's World of Super Adventure. There was something about seeing the Human Torch, the Thing, Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Girl there, with those other characters. Like, it was just, I couldn't understand it because you had these different type of characters, but yet you had the Fantastic Four there. And I did not really know they were from different companies, but unbelievable. Then obviously we used to run home from second grade to get on channel 25. School got out at 3, and so we could just get the last 15 minutes of the Spider-Man 67 cartoon, which was in syndication. And then obviously Super Friends were all over the place. I had the bed sheets. It was my first introduction to Neil Adams. And then, of course, in 1977, I have to say, the pilot episode of The Incredible Hulk. What's funny about that is I was so young, my parents thought that I would be scared with that. And I had an older brother, and he got to stay up, and they sent me to bed. But I snuck out, and I looked, and I watched that whole episode of the pilot episode of the Hulk, and I became a Hulk fanatic. And it was the perfect time to be a fanatic because at that time, all that Marvel merchandise was coming up, and you had so much Hulk, so much Spider-Man, and arguably you could say that the Hulk was the most powerful, the most popular superhero from 78, 79, and 80, because all the households watched, and then they watched Dallas after, if you remember.
That was the lead-in.
Dallas was on after, but that, once again, that series was so monumental. And Steve, where you picked up rocks and stuff, I cut my tough skin jeans, and I would run outside the neighborhood, up and down the streets, over and over again with no shirt and bare feet, and do the Hulk run and all that. And the girls across the street, I'll never forget, Christine Waite and her sister and Kristen Allen from up the street, they were playing Tea Time, and I came up there and they said, "John, we don't want to play the Hulk today. We don't want to play the Hulk today." So I was just so obsessed, and you can imagine. And let's not forget those cardboard bricks that you played in preschool you could build. There was nothing like building those up. And then the Hulk just smashing through, like, when you saw the beginning. And just to say one thing, when I talked to Roy about this, he was on the set of that pilot episode, and he was watching Lou Ferrigno break out of that dome, and they had him, and he said he was watching it, and he said it was funny how they were filming it and all that. And I said to him, that was some of my most favorite part, is when he was, and she's describing it, and then the smoke coming out. Never, ever, ever could get out of it. And just really quick, me and my friend Frankie in his pool used to play this game called Underwater Armageddon, where he would be the Submariner and I would be the Hulk, and we both hold our breath and jump up to in the deep end of the pool, and we'd go all the way down, and we would fight like Hulk versus Submariner, and the first person who couldn't hold their breath any longer would have to go to the top, and he would lose. So it was a great game to play, and I usually won because the Hulk wasn't going to lose. But that's how obsessed. And I didn't even know comics existed. But those were definitely the things that kind of singed into my head. And then obviously other cartoons and other stuff started after that, but nothing like that. And yes, the 77, that Lou Ferrigno Hulk series. And in a later episode, I'll tell you about when I first met Lou Ferrigno. What a destroyer of dreams. Okay, so Steve, it ruined everything.
I know what he's going to say. I know what he's going to say. I've been there.
Okay, Steve, you go for number 2.
All right. So number 2, we're talking about an annual. In England, we had these hardback annuals.
Yeah.
I had a Captain Britain annual, 1978. And come on, you knew I was going to go there.
Oh, yeah.
So pretty soon after I told everyone that my new hobby was going to be comics. And I remember my mom asked me how I was going to be into comics with no money. And I was like, I haven't thought about that yet. Well, my brother told one of his friends, "Oh, my little brother, he's into comics now." So one day his friend comes over with this box. In there is Captain Britain Weekly 1 through 39.
Wow.
And this annual. And by the way, issue 1 did have the mask, and issue 24 had the mask of had the little paper plane in it. So it's quite, collectible. Of course, I didn't have any idea about any of that. And I was going through and I was taking a look, but the weeklies were black and white because obviously only the Yanks could get color and us English people had to get black and white. However, the annual was full color and reprinted the first 6 issues of the Captain Britain series, including his origin. We're talking work by Chris Claremont. He was the one chosen because he was an Anglophile, of course.
Yep.
And the art was by someone that's just Fred Kidder. No one remembers his name anymore, but he did some really great work in there. And I was always thinking, I was reading the words and, Brian Braddock, Captain Britain, was always saying chum. He was always like, all right, chum, let's see what you've got. And I was like, oh, chum, hey, chum. I was like, who says that? Chris. And I when I spoke to Chris Claremont, I was like, Chris, where did you get chum from? What the hell is it? Well, he goes, I said, come on, in England, none of us said chum. But the funny thing is that my mum was right, and I didn't have any money, so all I had basically to read were the Captain Britons for about a year, and I read the annual more and more than anything else. And there's a beautiful sequence there in Stonehenge where they have a little origin and you can choose like the sword or this little bracelet. And he chooses the bracelet. And he's like, Merlin's there. And I was reading this, and his first super villain that he's going to fight is a villain called the Hurricane, or Hurricane, as you guys say. Okay, he had a great costume, and I would spend hours trying to draw the Hurricane, the way his body was, and the coloring. It was beautiful. And I read that story again and again and again. It was like every night I got in, I was like, all right, homework's done. Boom. The same story. And it was like, wow, it never got old. I don't understand it. I wish that I had that focus now. And then that was the first time that I thought to myself, someone has to draw this stuff. Maybe I can do this one day. Okay, so this is revolutionary. So I'd look at it and go, I wonder if I can sort of do this. I got my pad and paper out. Again, that's my mum, that was cheap. Pad and paper, and I started to draw. So from there, I started to do my initial, attempts at drawing. But that Captain Britain annual was my best friend for an entire year.
Wow.
That's a great story.
All right, Niall, number 2.
All right, mine mine's sequential, man. The way this goes, I've got my superpowers action figures. I've had the Batman and the Superman for about a year. My neighbor gave me, a Robin and a Penguin, I think, and I started watching Super Friends, right? Because I was really into the Snorks and stuff, and then all of a sudden I saw Super Friends and the Snorks were out of the way, and I was like, wow, this is great, but this Superman doesn't look like what I saw. But then my mom's like, oh, there's another Superman cartoon. And, and she went into the TV guide and found it. And
I know what
it came out in 1988. I probably wasn't really watching it until 89.
I know what it is.
Ruby
I knew
Spears'
it.
Superman. And now my superpower Superman looked like the Superman on TV. And to me, those adventures and the things that were going on in that series, that just took it away. Now I knew how Superman acted, right? So now I was doing what John was doing, dressed up as the Hulk. Except I had a towel around my neck. I was jumping off stuff. I'm at preschool telling kids, all right, I'm Superman. You can be this and that. And we're the Super Friends, but I'm Superman. And here at this point too, I did get a couple Superman comics, but I didn't know how to read. I couldn't really read then. I was 5 years old or so, and 5 or 6, no 5. And so this cartoon, and my mom at the time invested in a VCR camcorder system, right? You had like 2 different boxes that went on the TV, but then when she had a big camcorder and she'd record our things, she'd take the whole rig with her, but that could record. So my mom would start recording these episodes for me, and I wish it held up as much as I remember it being amazing. Not like the Bruce Timm stuff that holds up very well, but again, it still holds a special place in my heart, and that just brought the world of Superman in all those people to me.
Those were based on the Christopher Reeve stuff too. That was better.
Yeah.
That when you see it today, it didn't do well in syndication. But when I saw them, they were still pretty cool. Like They were good, solid cartoons. But
They were. Didn't
yeah,
last
they-
long though. They only did about one season of it.
Yeah, only one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Brian, what does Mr. Pulido have for number 2?
Well, let's see, guys. We are going back into the time capsule, probably to 1974.
Wow.
And Niall, if you pull that image up, we'll get to talking.
Oh, yes.
So what you're looking at, gentlemen, is the Marvel Slurpee Cup series. These were released in the summer of 1974 also. I lived in rural New Jersey, exit 105, a place called Long Branch, and we had 2 7-Elevens. And during that summer, the 7-Eleven were releasing these cups. I think the first time they did this type of thing.
Yeah.
And I would bike down to the 7-Elevens, like 10 miles, 15 miles apart from each, and I would get the new releases. And in reality, out of all the cups you see there, that is a complete set. On my own, I probably kept about 34. And I was just, down in those Slurpees every week. And then through the years, I tracked down the others, and it did take some time. But let me explain to you why I adore these things. So very early on in comics, I was instantaneously coming from a creative perspective. I would read the comics and adore them, and then I would start looking at the actual mechanics. What is story? Why is this exciting me? What could I do to learn about it? Now, at that time in Marvel Comics, there was a complete explosion. And as you know, John, this was under the tutelage of Rascally Roy Thomas, an absolute explosion. So it wasn't just superheroes any longer. Now, in the universe of Marvel, we are just discovering all these different types of beings, gods like Thor and Hercules, and humans like Medusa and Black Bolt, even sword and sorcery characters like Conan, Red Sonja, and my favorites, of course, monsters like Werewolf by Night and others. Well, heck, even mutants. And the idea of seeing all these together in a symphony in one contained universe utterly blew my mind. And that's why it has a very special place in my study, because it is a constant reminder of the potential of imagination. The Marvel Universe is definitely one of the most incredible things ever invented. And I think right here during this time, you're really starting to see it explode with these cups.
Oh, God.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. This is the checklist. I also have the checklist, and I've arranged my cups in the order of the checklist. Gentlemen, feel free to comment on the cups.
Well, I have every Hulk ever made of the 7-Eleven, all the editions. I have the checklist. I even have the glasses. Remember, you could send away for. Now, just really quick, there was no 7-Elevens near me. I remember the ads in the comic.
Crazy.
And when you're a young kid in the 70s, like something that's down the street and you're young, or in another town, that's like might as well be a world away. So that's true. Never saw those cups or anything till years later, and they're just so filled with magic. And a little side note on the next series, the X-Men is on that, and that's Wolverine's very first memorabilia, outside of anything else. Was the X-Men 7-Eleven cup, and that's the first Wolverine memorabilia you can get. That
well, of course, we didn't get any of that in England, of course. The first time I heard about it was when I first saw a grown man almost crying. I'm in the comic store, and the guy who was working there, I remember his name was Bennett, and he was talking about those cups, and particularly a cup that had Yellow Jacket on it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's his favorite character of all time. And then he was talking, and he looked at me, and he said, "I lost it, and I'm still trying to find it." And I swear, his eyes were like tearing up. I was like, "God's sakes, man, what's wrong with you?" It was just, he had so much emotion. He goes, "I've been looking for 9 years for my Yellow Jacket cup." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's hardcore." That was my first exposure to those cups. But I have seen a couple in my time, and I know that if I'd been there in 74 in New Jersey, I would have taken all of your cups.
That's a very fun conversation, and maybe a conversation for another time.
Yes.
Because I was the comic kid, and what I would do is comic books were put out on a Thursday, if memory serves, at that time. And what I did is I cut a deal with all the pharmacies and all the 7-Elevens and convenience stores to put out the books. I would do a route. I'd leave school early, and I'd get first dibs. So, for example, when Nova #1 came out, I had every copy in town, and I was more than willing to sell this 20-cent comic book to $1 to anyone who wanted a copy.
Wow.
And let me just tell you this, Roy, I know you're watching. This is right to Roy. When you look at those cups, you see Roy Thomas's editor-in-chief, and you see so many of his, you could just see that new generation of superheroes that came out. And that Thundra cup is one of my favorites. That is so cool. You got so many of his characters are on there, and just when Roy's editorialship, just that new generation of all those characters, that's what that reminds me of. So Roy, I'm sorry, but I gotta tell you, I love you, brother. Love you.
That's great.
Okay.
Thunder's a good character. I think first appearance, am I wrong? Fantastic Four 134, something like that.
Oh yeah.
No, 129.
129.
129. Stand corrected. I was in the zone.
Okay. My number 2 has a lot to do with the 7-Eleven cups, but those were those were way too ahead of me. I was too young. 74. I was only a year old, but I saw these, and when these came out, the world knew it. The toy world changed, and everybody in the neighborhood had them. I know somebody here has had them. Niall, the Mego figures.
They're the best.
I got into these things well before comics, and I've had my mom used to buy in bulk the Batmans, and she would have them in the closet because me and my brother would break. But we just playing those Mego figures, obviously the whole, I remember getting the Thor off the shelf and seeing the Conan the Barbarian and the hair, how he had the real hair. And I thought, wow, these look like Barbies. But this is a superhero. I couldn't believe that you could they actually had these superheroes. And it was so huge. And then the other thing that blew my mind was they had them carded. But I remember one time going to this toy store, my mom taking me up the street. It was in the center of where I lived, and it was called Mr. Big Toyland, a world famous toy store. People all over the world came to that toy store in Waltham, Massachusetts. I didn't know at the time. It was just up the street from us on Moody Street. And then I saw the Mego Hulk in a box. And I was like, they come in it was so, and then when you turned it over, Steve, you got the Herb Trimp Incredible Hulk in one of my favorite positions. That when I die and you think of a few things, I'm going to think of that Herb Trimp picture and that Hulk. And my mom would never get it for me. And I remember it was like $5. They priced it up. And the one in the stores were like $2.99. So she wouldn't get me that Hulk one. But I wanted that box. It was like purple, like his pants. The Mego figures were incredible with the decals. Till this day, the greatest, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree, the greatest superhero toy figures ever made. It was incredible. Obviously, they made the 12-inch Hulk and the stuff later, the Elastic Hulk, which I'm obsessed with. But those came later. But it was those Mego figures I first got into that I just like. They were so colorful, so bold. And like I said, when they had the real hair, the Conan and the Thor, I was just like, these can kill the Barbies. Like it was so crazy. So that's my number 2. Steve, go ahead. You're number 1.
Whoa.
All right. This is pivotal because after this, I stopped all my other hobbies. When I was younger, I was into, my toy cars and my soldiers. And I had this weird fetish for my Evel Knievel stunt bike. Okay, yes.
Fantastic.
Yes. So after this, I was like, you know what? It's all changing. We're on a geography trip for school. It's the spring of 1983. And we're on this beautiful school coach. Not a bus, but a beautiful coach. It's very luxurious. So we're driving off into the country, And, the teachers are warbling on about, land formations and rocks and whatever. It's one of the most boring things in the world. And I got up and I stood on the bus, and there were some people in the back reading. And I was like, "What are you reading?" And they went, "Comics. Look at this." And I, to my eternal shame, I went like this. "What are you, kids? It's like crap." Okay. Well, I went and sat down again. And then about an hour later on, they stopped and everyone left because they had to go to the restroom. I didn't have to go. So I walk around the coach just, because I'm thinking of like, okay, I see the little stack of comics on the back. And I'm like, let's have a look at one of these things. And I picked up an issue of Conan. Now, if you want to put that is the actual issue. That is it. If this place is burning, I'm getting that issue because I can't replace it. Be with me forever. And it's issue 147. It says there, it's June 1983. And so I open it up, and it's my first exposure to Mr. Roy Thomas and John Buscema. And it's a very simple story, and it's something I explain to people, how you get people into reading comics. No experience, nothing. The issue just begins and ends in 22 pages. And in those 22 pages, it made a fanatic of me. So basically, I'm turning the pages. Conan, of course, rides into a new town. Okay. And he's getting to know, and everyone's like, "Oh, don't go near the tower." And there was this massive tower. And I just love the Roy and John. They always had these wizards. And this wizard guy comes out, and he's like, "Yeah, ooh." And I was like, "Well, what's he doing?" And they were drilling. He had these guys that were just going around, and they were drilling deep, deep, deep into the earth to release these demons, these winged demons. So, it was just ridiculous. I was reading that, but I couldn't stop. Each page I'm turning, and they're drilling further and further until in the end, like, it gets to a point where Conan's going to have to step in. He's like, "Wait a minute, guys. I can't have this. They're going to destroy this town." And suddenly, they get further enough, and these winged things come out, and that's the first time Conan's taking care of business. He's, then finally, of course, every single one of those evil wizards, they always got the end of his sword, always, I put the book down, and I just thought to myself, this is it. My life begins anew. No more hobbies. I want this. I want all of this. And that was it. That's the beginning of what you see here. There's the beginning. Conan 147.
Awesome. What a great way to begin.
Oh, it was like Pandora's box. I understand.
Yeah, and it's tough because you start at the top. First of all, you got Roy Thomas story and Buscema art. That's it. Where you go from there?
Oh, Niall, go ahead. Number one for Niall. I'm always curious with Niall.
Hey. Actually, I mean, if you paid attention in the past, that I've talked of this before. But for me, at 8 years old now, I'm exposed to comics. I've been drawing since 2 years old. Once I got a pencil in my hand, I've been drawing Ninja Turtles, everything that I see and love, and I start dabbing a little bit with drawing some comics. And I've been reading a couple comics, starting to get into it more, but nothing really grabbed me. So it's 1992. Decide I'm going to go to the comic shop. Card Castle's right around the corner. It's like a 2-minute walk. I walk in and I see Batman Shadow of the Bat on the shelf. And mind you, Super Friends Batman, I mean, that's all you really had because Batman the Animated Series hasn't premiered yet. And, you always see kind of Batman as wholesome. I'm looking at this cover and I'm like, what is going on with Batman? And he looks fierce as hell. And this is a Brian Stelfreeze cover. And I was just like, I have to get this. So I pulled this book off the shelf. I bought it, and amongst a couple other books, but I bought this book right here. And when I opened the pages and saw Norm Brayfogel's pencils, I was first off hooked on the way he drew. I've never seen Batman like this before. And then obviously reading it and Alan Grant and Norm, rest of their souls, Alan passed away last year. And I think Norm passed away, was it 2018? Something like that. Yeah. But I mean, just the story captured me. Batman is now, he's trapped in an asylum. You know, he's crazy. And mind you, I'm like, what is going on? This is not Batman. This is insane. What's going on? And you know, I'm reading this, and in this book here, I read over and over and over again. And then, you know, I went, you know, a couple months later, and there was issue 2, you know, and they're like, oh, you know, you can do a pull list. And I was like, what is that? And like, well, you just it's a subscription. We'll put aside what you want. And this series here is the only comic book series that I continuously purchased from 1992 to 2000 when the series ended. It's my only full run that I own. But even in many of the issues weren't, you know, it kind of like bogged down. It was like a roller coaster, right? But I kept with it and I stuck with it, which was great because then after this I got into girls and other stuff, and then it stopped. You know, comics kind of took a back seat. But to this day, again, like your Conan book there, Steve. If there's a fire, I have to at least grab issue 1 because this is where I started drawing. This is where I started learning anatomy at 8 years old. I mean, this book was everything to me to comics, and was like my gateway into comics. And after that, I was just hooked. I was buying comic books everywhere, gas stations, liquor stores, pharmacies, other comic shops. Costco would sell them in bulk.
Wow.
And you can get big packs of comics, just random comics. I mean, it was just never ending from there. But this right here, this is my holy grail, and is a part of me and how I got into where I am today. And I wish I could have met Alan and Norm.
Wow. Interesting. Wow. Okay, Brian, number 1. What is this Mad Monster Man's number 1? I'm interested. You were already in the throes of comicdom, in the convention scene already. The 7-Eleven. What do we got?
All of that is true, and yet I didn't look at myself yet as a collector. And this next item I'm going to show you is a symbol, which I will explain further. So, Niall, without further ado, please feast your eyes on an original Captain America Sentinel of Liberty badge.
Right.
So most people who know me, and for those of you who don't, I am a gigantic Captain America fan, and I'm about to prove it. Cap is my dude, and to me, this Sentinel of Liberty badge represents one of the ultimate fun things a fan of Captain America can get. If you purchase Captain America #1 during the Golden Age, in the back was a little coupon, and you can join a group called the Sentinels of Liberty. And for a very small amount of money, you can get this metal badge, but you could also get a membership card, which I'm still attempting to track down without someone's name on it. However, the reason I show that is just also like you guys to show you this book that really is the book that started it off for me.
Oh.
So this is Captain America 176. Try to show you without a glare.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about this book was, yes, I was buying comics and going into pharmacies, but that was the book when I became a collector. So it was the summer of 1974, and this is a very impactful image. And fascinatingly, this is where Captain America quits being Captain America. All this start, the story that is to go on, he is not Cap. Sometimes he's plain clothes, he becomes nomad, etc. But this particular book cemented myself as a collector and someone who now appreciated this form and who became very dedicated. And as you and I, all of us sit here today, I have collected Captain America on a monthly basis ever since that time. There has never been a time in my life, whether I was like a poor, starving post-college student or whether the ups and the downs of my life, I've always gotten Cap. So one of the many reasons I like Captain America is he does represent a simpler time. You know, good guys are good guys, bad guys are bad guys. He fights for the dream. And I believe that he's always had a wonderful code of ethics and just knows what's up and what's down. So I've always enjoyed all the storylines. This particular era was wonderful because storylines, well, this is actually a longer storyline, but stories were maybe 1, 2, or 3 issues. They would have a little B plot that would carry over for 6 months, but they would get resolved. But this particular book, Captain America 176, July of 1974, like you guys, this is the one. I read it, and fascinatingly, I could totally identify with the idea that Cap is this classic guy, but just something happened at the end of that story that morally switched it off for him, and he had to go and kind of walk the streets and walk the country and become this other thing. In my life as a kid, you know, I would go on to be a punk rocker, a heavy metal guy, kind of anti-establishment character. And yet, you know, the very simple code of ethics that Cap had, you know, I kept with for my whole time. So Captain America 176 right there is the number one book that fermented me as a comic book collector. And for better or for worse, as I'm sure you guys can relate, I have never gone back since.
Wow.
Hey,
Yeah.
Brian. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, John. Just
No,
really
go ahead,
quick.
bro. Go ahead now.
You know, as a Captain America collector and stuff, have you dove back into? Have you collected any of the books from the 40s?
You know, I've a couple of years ago, I started. In fact, I bought my first Golden Age cap from Steve. It's true, and that started it. You guys gave me a great deal. It's a good book, and it started the sickness. You know what had happened for me was, for all intents and purposes, authentically, I completed my Captain America collection before I was 20, and that's going back 40 years. And, you know, I was sort of resting on my laurels. I have every major appearance, you know, in Daredevil, Strange Tales, all the major Avenger appearances. But it wasn't until maybe 4 years ago, I saw that beautiful issue over at Torpedo with Steve, and I was like, I think it's time. And I can profess to you that very quietly, I am looking for my next 10-year goal is to see if I can complete that GA collection by the time I turn 70. So we'll see.
No,
Just
'cause
so you know,
I had to hook you up on that because remember we had a nice conversation about Cap.
Yes.
And it was really deep in the weeds, and the people surrounding us were like lost. They're like, those guys are ignoring us, and we were just going hammered, you know. So he came over and he's like, "Oh man," and I was like, "I'll give you the deal of the century. Let's get you rocking and rolling on the Golden Age. Boom, deal done."
It was. I love to have a provenance on every comic I buy, and that one will forever. That's the one that started the new sickness. I blame you.
there's a guy I know. We know him very well. Actually, has all of the Golden Age books.
Amazing.
And he's gonna start selling them off.
That's great. Put them up. Put them on the speed dial.
I will let him. I will get you guys in touch. He's got the whole run.
That's
Look at my boy Steve
and it's
making
raw.
people's dreams come true. Look at that. Steve loves that. That's the thing about Steve. This is why I love Steve.
My study's in the next room right over here, and I still have that puppy on display for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I love it.
Okay. Well, okay. My number one, once again, Steve, here we do. We have so much in common, but I did not know that this was even a comic book. Now, why don't you show it? Roy Thomas, once again, I tell Roy this story. I don't know if like Roy has so much. It's so funny how Roy was in my life even well before I got to know the man. But it was probably like in 77 or 78. Me and my mother were at a department store, and it was like a Lechmere or a Caldor. We were going up an escalator, or maybe even a Bradley's, and I'm holding her hand. But the guy in front of me has a rolled up comic in his back pocket. And I'm just looking at this thing, and I could see the helmet. I could see the white letters. And I didn't know what it was. It reminded me of the cereal boxes. It was just the colors. I had no idea what that was. And he's just going up the escalator, and I'm looking at this thing. Now, what's interesting, it's like I said, it's like 77, 78. This came out in 1970. Why was that guy having that comic in his back pocket at that time it is unbeknownst to me. But I didn't even know that, like I said, I didn't even know it was a comic book. So when it was going up, I just remember those colors. It just singed into my brain. Then years later, as I'm a collector, and then I'm getting to know stuff because, you know, there's no internet or anything. But then I looked and I was like, oh my God, that was Conan #1. Because I will never forget that spear. I will never forget that. And I was never a huge Conan fan. But this comic book is the first time I ever saw anything, and I did not know what it was. But once again, that impression that just was singed into my brain, and it never left. Just the brown coloring. Like I said, it was like the cereal boxes or the Cracker Jack boxes. There was something about it that just, I'm looking at that and I never forgot it. I didn't even ask my mom or anything because it just was, like I said, I must have been like 3 or 4 years old. But once again, freaking Roy Thomas is in my life at that moment. And I'm just like, and if you talk about how life brings you to a certain place in life. Like I'm with you guys, I'm in this industry, I make a great living, and I'm with probably one of the greatest comic creators that has ever lived. And I would say I wouldn't doubt that in any sense. But I'm just saying, like, this guy who changed my life when I was reading his stuff is now my best friend, and I we go all over the world together. And it's just like he was right there at the beginning. And it's just so funny how that happened. But that Conan #1 will always have a place in my heart. And I don't know, I would love to know if that guy, why did he have that? You know, it's still a question I will go to my grave thinking. But after that, and then I started getting into the comics. And like I said, I discovered what it was. But it was so beautiful to see it at that time. And just weirdly had this thing in my head, and we all have that. Now, in closing, Brian, why don't you tell me about the magic of comic books. Why are we, Steve, Niall, like it's like crack? What is it about these things? Because you're making these things and you're always in the throes, and you put your love in every panel. What is it about these pages, these colors, these lines that make up so crazy? We skill.
There's something utterly unique about this art form. It's one of the two art forms unique to America, comic books, and I believe jazz.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The interplay between words and pictures leaves a gap where your imagination can fill in. And what I love to tell everybody is, everyone who's watching these current motion pictures and they're having the experience of seeing these things that are so spectacular, what I share with them is, I've been seeing that since the 70s. Yeah. Because that's what comics do. They fire the imagination. The interplay between words and pictures and the gaps lets you fill them in with just the magic of your own imagination. So I believe that's a great part of it. I think you need to like words. You need to like pictures. And what I'd also assert is the following, is that comic books make you do the work, whereas a motion picture does it for you. You sit there and it does it. Whereas with comics, there's an interaction. A story is being told, and yet you could add your own brushstrokes to it. So I think that's what makes it unique to many other art forms.
Yeah. What about you, Steve?
I agree 100%. It sparks the imagination, and having a Captain Britain annual, and the only thing that I can read, that somehow each night when I read it, somehow I forgot, what was coming next, and I would turn the page and I would look at certain things, the way the foot was, the way the hands were, cracking into bricks, and just stuff like that. And it was just like the way power was, and the way the villain was. They had this villain in there called the Reaver. He was like this weird guy, and he was in this little vehicle. And I just thought to myself, who thinks of this stuff? And it was just brilliant. And my imagination was running riot. And yeah, I've found myself feeling sorry for people who didn't read or have never read, and they don't get it. And they're like, "Oh, Steve, what's wrong with you?" I'm like, "No, you don't understand." Yeah. So we are very fortunate. We have libraries of material, so we are the fortunate ones.
That's right.
What about you now?
Yeah, I think with comics, it's so unique because I think it's the most gratifying form of escapism, because you're reading, you're viewing pictures, but as you're reading and you're seeing the images, your imagination takes over. Sometimes those images actually come alive in your mind. You see the movement that you physically see movement, right? Like a moving picture. You hear the sound effects when they're punching. It's something that you really, the TV gives you all that, right? Movies just give you that. You sit there and do it. A novel is a bit different. When you're reading novels, you can escape in it, and it's all imagination. The way I may see something in the book may be different in your mind, but the fact of how diverse of characters, storylines, universes, and the fact that you don't know what's coming out next month, right? You don't know what's going to happen. So you get to sit there in anticipation, and you get to guess what's going to happen. There's no previews. There's no commercials of what's coming next week. They may give you a little blurb, but it's not much. So I really think comics were able to grab your imagination better than any form of entertainment. And I think, I think a lot of young kids and some adults, you miss a little of that, right? But for us that keep doing it, that escapism is still there. And when we go back and read those books, it's still there like it was. I think it's the best form of entertainment and escapism ever created. And I only want it to thrive.
Yeah, and Steve, you always remind me. Steve said one of the best quotes. I don't even know if the guy remembers, but he said when he looked at those pages, he saw his imagination in paper. Like it spoke to him, like all the things he thought about, and then he actually saw it on like a material form. I want to just tell you quickly. I bet you guys do this too. Like I would be walking down the street. I was even in sex in the middle, in the heist of it, and I would just drift off and I would think of like panels, Sal Buscema's foot, like how he would put the whole toe like this, this, like, and I remember my one of my girls at the time, she's like, "What are you thinking about?" And I said,
thinking about Sal Buscema's foot.
I said, sometimes when I see the trees and the wind is blowing, I see like a Herb Trimpe or Sal Buscema Incredible Hulk. She had no idea what I was talking about, but I don't know what it is. You just sometimes go off. Do you guys ever have that? Like you can just do anything, even today, and you just start thinking back, and it comes to a comic book like that. It just shows you how truly powerful that medium is, that we still can go back to it, and like it manifests itself in our minds at any time. You've ever, just maybe not as extreme as me, but you ever had any Brian?
Not in that particular moment, but in other moments, yes.
Crazy.
Yeah, I would have to say that, John. We went on a school trip, and I was with a buddy of mine, and the mother and father were like, "Okay, TV's off. You got school trip in the morning. Go to bed." And so we would play this game because Sal Buscema would always draw the characters with their arms doing this, like if they were getting hit, and their arms would do this, and it would always be like, "Aye!" and the arms were doing this. So like he would throw something at me, and I'd be like, "Aye!" and we were doing this, and making a noise for about an hour. Just doing that. And I'm sure when you see some Sal stuff, and there's always a character doing this, either being hit or being hit by a laser beam, but their arms are always crossed like this. So when you said that, that's what that reminds me of, until the parents came in and said, "Shut up, you two, you got to get up in the morning."
Well, I completely agree. I spend most of my time in my imagination. I apologize to my neighbors when I'm walking the dogs around the block. They may or may not get a hello, because I am literally in my mind. I'm carving a story out. I'm rewriting, that kind of thing. So yes, I have an overactive imagination, and do comic book stories pop into my mind all the time. Not only that, I would share this strange notion with you, is that I like to reread a comic book run with some additional information. So for example, I not too long ago reread a run of Thor by Jack Kirby, and then went right back into Kirby Fourth World, imagining them all as one interconnected storyline, which is before Ragnarok, after Ragnarok. I've done things like reread Jack Kirby's OMAC, One Man Army Corps, with this notion that OMAC, if you've ever read it, if you haven't read it, it's great, that he ostensibly believes he's a good guy, but I reread it that he was a man who did not realize that he was actually working for the bad guy the whole time. So try rereading it. Everyone he faced off against it works. Everyone he faced off against was actually trying to do things for good. He was working for the bad guys. So,
all right.
So it's kind of fun to do that. I did reread OMAC one other time, and I said, okay, he's the Captain America of the future. And that works pretty good too. So there's a lot of kind of scratching, rewriting you can do with comics.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one more little quick story. This kid up the street, his name was Charlie Tibbetts. He lived a couple houses down. And remember when underoos were a big thing? Sure. I remember somehow my brother had a copy of the Marvel Superheroes of the Hulk 141. It was but it was the Marvel Superheroes one, the reprint of it. And I fell in love with Doc Samson, like right away, that 141, like it was just incredible. But I was at this kid Charlie Tibbetts' house, and he had the Flash the Flash underoos. I stole his shirt. It was a little small for me too. And then I took a red marker that I got at the house and I colored the circle, the white circle, red, and it looked terrible. So
Yeah,
I could
Doc
get
Samson.
that lightning bolt, so I could pretend, Steve, leave me alone, so I could be Doc Samson for a few. I'm sorry, Charlie. I don't know where you are today, but
Scandal. John,
but it was
scandal.
terrible. Okay,
Terrible.
well, we would love, thank you for everybody watching. We would love to hear your stories and telling us what things that got you into our comics, into your comics, into your favorite stuff. Put the comments down below. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
For everything. We'd love to hear. We're going to definitely have you back, and we'll do some more of these little fun things. Niall, always thank you. Steve, get us out of here while Mighty Mystic Millionaire brings us home.
Boom!